You know that smell? That warm, heavy, can't quite name it smell that hits you the moment you open the door to a church fellowship hall on a Sunday afternoon? Smelled like onions cooking down slow in a cast iron pan, like sweet potato and cinnamon and something smoky underneath it all, like cornbread that had just come out of the oven and was still breathing on the counter. Child, that smell could stop you right in your tracks. Didn't matter how old you were. Didn't matter if you'd been sitting through a 2-hour service and your feet were aching in your good shoes. The moment that fellowship hall door opened, every problem you had just melted away because you knew something incredible was waiting on the other side of those folding tables. That's where this story begins, in a church hall, around a table covered in mismatched dishes brought by women who'd been up since before sunrise just to make sure everyone left full. Number 1. Smothered chicken with onion gravy. The first thing you'd see at that potluck table was smothered chicken. And I mean smothered. That chicken had been seasoned, dredged in flour, and browned in a heavy skillet until the skin was deep golden. Then it went back into the pan with sliced onions cooked down until they were nearly melting, a little garlic, black pepper, and just enough broth to make the richest gravy you ever poured over rice. Nobody used a recipe card for this. You watched your mother do it, and one day she handed you the pan. The gravy was the whole point. Spooning it over white rice or sopping it up with light bread. My mother used to say smothered chicken was the dish you made when you wanted to say I love you without saying a word. She wasn't wrong. Number 2, crackling cornbread. Right next to that smothered chicken, you'd find crackling cornbread. Not the sweet yellow stuff from a box. This was white cornmeal, buttermilk, a little baking soda, an egg, and cracklings, crispy pieces of rendered pork fat that gave every bite a salty, smoky crunch you couldn't get anywhere else. You poured that thick batter into a cast iron skillet that had been heating with a little grease in the bottom. That hot grease gave the cornbread a crust on the bottom that was almost like a cracker. The inside was dense and moist. People would break off pieces and drop them straight into a bowl of butter beans and call it a meal. It didn't need anything else. It arrived complete. Number 3, butter beans with ham hock. Those big creamy butter beans simmered for hours with a smoked ham hock until the broth turned silky and tasted of smoke and pork and something deeper than both. The beans got so tender they'd practically dissolve on your tongue, and the meat from that ham hock would fall into the pot in soft little shreds. You seasoned it with salt, black pepper, maybe a pinch of sugar, and cooked it until it smelled like something that had been working all day just to please you. At every potluck, the pot of butter beans was nearly empty by the time you got to it. People weren't shy about going back for seconds. Number 4, deviled eggs with paprika and pickle juice. The church potluck version of deviled eggs was something different from what you see today. Those ladies used sweet pickle juice, a little yellow mustard, and sometimes homemade mayonnaise, and they piped that filling back into the egg whites with a technique so practiced it looked like art. Then came a generous, confident dusting of paprika over every single egg. They carried those eggs to church on a special plate with a dome lid kept only for deviled eggs. Bringing them was a statement. It meant you'd taken your time. And those eggs were always the first thing gone. If you weren't near the front of that line, you were going home disappointed. Number 5, macaroni salad with hard-boiled eggs. Right beside the deviled eggs, a big bowl of macaroni salad. Cold, not baked. Elbow macaroni tossed with chopped hard-boiled eggs, celery, sweet relish, onion, and a creamy dressing of mayonnaise and apple cider vinegar. Some families added pimentos for color, some added yellow mustard for sharpness. Every family had their version, and every family was certain theirs was the right one. It sat in that big ceramic bowl all afternoon, and people kept coming back to it. Cold macaroni salad on a warm Sunday was one of life's quiet pleasures, humble, filling, and it made everything else on your plate taste a little more like home. I can still see my mother getting ready for church potluck Sunday. She'd be up before the sun, and I'd hear her in the kitchen, the soft bubbling of something on the stove, a cast iron lid set on the counter. By the time I came downstairs in my slip and my Sunday socks, the whole house already smelled like a meal. She'd wrap the pots in dish towels, old ones she kept just for this purpose, and set them in a cardboard box lined with newspaper to stay warm during the car ride. She'd still have her apron on over her church dress. "Gloria, hold this door open," she'd say, and I would, and we'd carry those pots out to the car together, careful and slow, like we were carrying something precious, because we were, every time. Number 6, neck bones and rice. Neck bones were what you made when money was thin and mouths were many. You seasoned those pork neck bones, browned them in a pot, covered them with water, and let them simmer low and slow for hours. The bones released their gelatin into the broth and made it thick and deeply savory. Then you added your rice right into that pot and let it cook in all that flavor. The rice absorbed every bit of that smoky, meaty broth and came out tasting like something far more expensive than it was. Neck bones taught us that the best flavor doesn't come from a fine cut. It comes from the patience to cook something long enough to give up everything it has. Number 7, fried chicken livers. I know some of you just made a face. Stay with me. You'd soak the livers overnight in buttermilk to pull out the bitterness, then season them. Dredge them through seasoned flour and drop them into a cast iron skillet of hot oil. They cooked fast, just a few minutes each side, and came out with a shattery crust and a soft, rich center. Served hot with a little hot sauce and a stack of light bread to soak up the grease. Chicken livers weren't fancy, but they were honest, and if you grew up eating them, the smell of them frying could carry you back 30 years in an instant. Number 8, stewed tomatoes over white bread. This might be the most underestimated dish on this list. Canned tomatoes, or ones put up in mason jars from the summer garden, cooked down with butter, sugar, salt, and pepper until they were soft and collapsing. You'd lay slices of plain white bread flat in a bowl and ladle those hot stewed tomatoes right over the top. The bread soaked up the juice and swelled into something almost like a dumpling. My grandmother made this when someone was sick. She said tomatoes had healing in them. I don't know about the science, but I know a bowl of stewed tomatoes over bread, eaten under a quilt, while someone who loved you sat nearby. That had healing. I'm sure of that. Number 9, cold slaw with vinegar dressing. Old church potluck. Slaw wasn't creamy. It was a vinegar slaw. Cabbage shredded fine, tossed with sliced onion and carrot, dressed with apple cider vinegar, a little sugar, celery seed, and just a few drops of oil. No mayonnaise in sight. You let it sit and marinate for at least an hour before serving. What you got was tangy, crisp, and bright. It cut right through all that richness on your plate and woke your palate back up. In the heat of a southern summer, a scoop of cold vinegar slaw was about as close to perfect as food could get. Number 10, homemade yeast rolls. There is no greater compliment at a church potluck than someone walking up and asking, "Who made these rolls?" Because homemade yeast rolls were real work. You couldn't rush them. The dough had to rise twice. You had to feel it with your hands and know when it was ready. Soft and pillowy inside, glossy and golden on top, brushed with melted butter the moment they came out of the oven. Nobody brought store-bought rolls to church potluck. That was understood. If they came out right, soft and light and buttery, you'd hear about it for the rest of the year. Now let me tell you about the church mothers. Every church had them, those 4 or 5 women who had been cooking for that congregation since before half the members were born. They guarded their recipes like state secrets. You might compliment Sister Williams on her sweet potato pie until you were blue in the face and she would smile and say, "Thank you, baby." That was all you were getting. I think about that now and I feel 2 things at once. I understand it. Those recipes were their gift, their identity. But I grieve it too, because so many of those dishes are gone, truly gone, not written down anywhere, living only in the memory of people who are getting older every day. That's why I'm sitting here talking to you right now, so we can remember together. And speaking of remembering, I want to hear from you. Write down in the comments, tell me what dish you remember from church potluck. What's the one thing you wish you could taste one more time? I read every comment. And if nobody's told you to subscribe yet, go ahead and hit that button. It's free, and it means you won't miss a single recipe or story. Now let's keep going. Number 11, pig feet in vinegar. Brine. Pig feet require patience. You'd clean them thoroughly. Then simmer them for hours with onion, garlic, bay leaves, salt, red pepper, and a black pepper until the skin was tender and the meat nearly falling from the bone. Then you'd pack them in jars with a vinegar brine and let them pickle, picking up that sharp, tangy, spicy flavor. Eaten cold, straight from the jar, with your fingers and a piece of light bread. The skin was silky, the meat rich and tender. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest food made from parts nobody else wanted and making something good from what others threw away. That was a skill worth honoring. Number 12, candied yams with whole spices. I want to draw a line here. Canned yams with marshmallows came later. I'm talking about real sweet potatoes. Peeled, sliced thick, laid in a baking dish with butter, brown sugar, a whole cinnamon stick, whole cloves, nutmeg, ginger, and a splash of vanilla. Covered and baked low and slow until the potatoes were tender and their natural juices had combined with all that butter and sugar into a thick amber syrup. The whole spices floating in that syrup made the kitchen smell like Christmas morning and Sunday afternoon at the same time. These were candied yams, sweet and spiced and soft in the best way. Every potluck table had a pan of these, and every child made sure they got some before they were gone. Number 13, chitterlings with hot sauce. We are not going to skip chitterlings just because they make some people uncomfortable. Chitlins fed generations of Black families across this country, and they deserve their place on this list. After a long, dedicated cleaning, they went into a big pot with onion, garlic, vinegar, hot pepper, and salt, and cooked for hours until the broth was deeply rich and complex. At the church potluck, the chitlins pot was usually at the end of the table, with hot sauce right beside it and a stack of crackers. The people who wanted them knew where to find them, and they'd stand at that end of the table, perfectly, completely happy. Don't you ever let anyone talk you out of a food your people made with love. Number 14, black-eyed peas with salt pork. Dried black-eyed peas simmered with a chunk of salt pork, chopped onion, and black pepper until the peas were creamy and the broth was rich and the salt pork had rendered itself nearly invisible, but made its presence known in every bite. Sometimes a jalapeno went in, always low heat, always patience. Served over rice, a dish some called hoppin' john, or in a bowl with cornbread on the side. People ate black-eyed peas on New Year's Day for luck. But at the church potluck, they were there every month because some blessings don't need a special occasion. Number 15, bread pudding with whiskey sauce. Day old light bread, sometimes with a few biscuits mixed in, soaked through with a custard of eggs, whole milk, vanilla, sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and melted butter, pressed down into the pan, left to absorb, then baked until puffed and golden on top and dense and moist underneath. Then came the whiskey sauce, butter, powdered sugar, and egg, and a generous pour of whiskey cooked together into something warm and smooth and a little bit wicked. You'd spoon that sauce over a warm square of bread pudding, and the whole thing would sink into itself. The church ladies who made it pretended not to notice the whiskey in the recipe. They just made sure the pan was empty before they went home. My grandmother used to say 3 words: waste not, baby. Stale bread became bread pudding. Ham bones went into the beans. Chicken backs became stock. Nothing left her kitchen thrown out. She didn't do this because she was thrifty. She did it because she'd known real scarcity. And she respected food in a way that people who've always had enough sometimes forget to do. I think about that every time I see a recipe that takes something overlooked and makes it beautiful. That's what all 20 of these dishes are. Beautiful things made from overlooked ingredients by women who knew that love could be stretched as long as you kept the pot on low. Number 16, fried green tomatoes. Made when the tomatoes were still firm and tart before they'd ripened on the vine. Salted, left to sit, then dipped in buttermilk and dredged through seasoned cornmeal. Into hot oil they'd go, cooking until the crust was deeply golden and crunchy, and the tomato inside had softened just enough to give way without falling apart. At the potluck, they'd be stacked on a platter, still warm. Some folks ate them plain, some with hot sauce, some with a cayenne mayonnaise on the side. However you ate them, they tasted like late summer and front porches, and everything good about August before the heat becomes too much. Number 17, salmon croquettes. Canned pink salmon, not fresh. That's what went in, mixed with crushed crackers, a beaten egg, finely chopped onion, and bell pepper, salt, pepper, and a drop of hot sauce, shaped into small oval patties and fried in just enough oil to make the outside crispy. Golden and crunchy outside, soft and savory inside. At the church potluck, they sat proudly on that table next to the smothered chicken. Every woman who made them had her own small variation, a pinch of dill, a little lemon zest that made hers different from everyone else's. Making them right took practice, and the ones made by practiced hands were something truly special. Number 18, the payoff, sweet potato pone. Now I promised you this one. Settle in. Sweet potato pone is not pie, not a casserole. It is its own thing entirely. One of the oldest dishes in the African American culinary tradition. You grated raw sweet potatoes by hand on a box grater until you had a big mound of fine, wet orange shreds. Then you mixed in butter, sugar, eggs, whole milk, cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, a little molasses for depth, and vanilla extract. No flour, no leavening, nothing to make it rise like a cake. You poured it into a greased baking dish and put it in a low, patient oven. And what happened over that next hour or more was almost mysterious. The edges would set first and get chewy and almost candy-like, pulling away from the sides of the pan. The center would firm up slowly into something dense and custardy, sweet the way the earth is sweet, the way a sweet potato fresh from the ground is sweet, like something that came from somewhere real. My grandmother never measured anything for pone. She'd grate the sweet potatoes until the bowl looked right, add butter until it felt like enough. She'd taste the raw batter, and don't you lecture me about that. She lived to 92 and say, a little more spice, and in went the nutmeg. When she pulled it from the oven, it was dark on top, almost mahogany colored, and it smelled like warmth itself. You ate it warm, cut into squares, no whipped cream, no ice cream, nothing extra. The texture was dense and moist and slightly chewy at the edges, and the flavor was so deep, sweet potato and molasses and cinnamon and butter, that you'd find yourself going quiet after the first bite, just sitting with it, tasting it all the way down. She made pone for church homecoming every single year. She didn't say a word when she set it on that potluck table. People who'd eaten it before already knew, and people who hadn't would take a square out of politeness, then stand there with their eyes wide, realizing they'd just tasted something they hadn't known existed until that very moment. That dish deserves to be remembered. That dish deserves to be made. I want to tell you one more thing about it. My grandmother had a way of looking at a pan of pone right before she pulled it out of the oven. She'd open that oven door a crack and lean down and look at it, really look at it, and she'd say, not yet. Or she'd say, almost. And when she finally said, that's it, and pulled it out, she was always right. The center would be just set, just slightly given if you pressed it gently with one finger, and the edges would be pulling away clean. That was when it was perfect. I spent years trying to cook pone the way she did. Years. And I'll be honest with you, it took me a long time to stop measuring and start looking and feeling and trusting what I knew. That's really the lesson of pone. It's not just a recipe. It's a practice in trusting yourself, in knowing something not because a car told you, but because your hands and your eyes and the smell in the kitchen told you. My grandmother had that knowing, and she worked hard to pass it to me. So, if you take one thing away from everything I shared today, let it be sweet potato pone. Grate your potatoes by hand, go slow with the oven, taste as you go, and trust yourself. That's how my grandmother always did it. Number 19, peach cobbler in a cast iron skillet, fresh peaches in summer, peeled, sliced, tossed with sugar and cinnamon until they release their juice. A simple batter poured over melted butter in a hot cast iron skillet. The sugared peaches spooned over the top. In the oven, the batter rose up around the peaches and turned golden at the edges where it touched the iron. The peach juice caramelized and bubbled up through the crust in places, leaving sweet amber pockets of fruit and butter that were almost impossible to describe. You served it warm, always warm. If someone brought vanilla ice cream, and sometimes someone did, you put a scoop right on top and watched it melt in slowly. The whole pan would be gone in 10 minutes, no matter how large it was. Number 20, lemon icebox pie. At the very end of that dessert table, on a pie plate someone's grandmother had owned since 1954, sat the lemon icebox pie, creamy and cold and yellow as sunshine. Sweetened condensed milk, fresh lemon juice, and egg yolks whisked together until thick, poured into a graham cracker crust pressed by hand and baked just long enough to set. Then into the ice box until it was firm and cold and sliceable. Sometimes a cloud of whipped cream on top, sometimes just a thin lemon slice laid across each piece for elegance. After all the richness of that potluck table, a cold slice of tart, creamy lemon icebox pie was like opening a window on a warm day, bright and clean and sweet without being heavy. It was how you ended things on a high note, and those women always knew how to end things on a high note. Let's go back down that table one more time. Smothered chicken with onion gravy, crackling cornbread, butter beans with ham hock, deviled eggs with paprika and pickle juice, macaroni salad with hard-boiled eggs, neck bones and rice, fried chicken livers, stewed tomatoes over white bread, cold slaw with vinegar dressing, homemade yeast rolls, pig feet in vinegar brine, candied yams with whole spices, chitterlings with hot sauce, black-eyed peas with salt pork, bread pudding with whiskey sauce, fried green tomatoes, salmon croquettes, sweet potato pone, peach cobbler in a cast iron skillet, and lemon icebox pie. 20 dishes, 20 stories. Not one of them that didn't come from the hands of a woman who knew that feeding people was one of the most important things she could do with her time on this earth. People sometimes ask me why I keep doing this, talking through old recipes and old memories when I could just hand someone a recipe card and be done with it. I always tell them the same thing. The recipe isn't the point, the recipe is just the door. What's behind the door? That's the real thing. The woman who got up before sunrise to make sure everyone was fed, the family that gathered around a table and forgot for 1 hour everything that was hard about their lives, the child at the edge of a potluck. Table, plate in hand, eyes wide, about to taste something that would stay with them for the rest of their life. These dishes were made from humble ingredients by people who didn't have much. But what they made was magnificent, and the love poured into those pots and pans and cast iron skillets. That love fed people body and soul. It deserves to be remembered. I always think about what would happen if every one of us decided to make just one of these dishes for someone we love this week. Just one. Not because it's a holiday, not because there's a special occasion, just because somebody took care of us once. And the best way to honor that is to take care of somebody else. That's all a potluck ever was, really. People showing up with what they had, giving it to the table, and trusting that together there would be enough. And there always was. Don't you let it go, baby. Make one of these dishes. Make it for someone you love, and when they ask where you learned it, you tell them. An old grandmother sat you down at her kitchen table and shared it with you, because that's exactly what happened. I'll see you next time. And next time, we're going back to Christmas. I'm going to tell you about the 7 desserts my grandmother only made once a year at the holidays and why every single one of them was worth waiting 12 whole months for. You don't want to miss that one. Take care of yourselves now and keep on.